My name's Edward Lucas. I'm a senior editor at The Economist. I write about cybersecurity and other sort of intelligence and defense-related issues. But you haven't come to hear about me, so I'm going to introduce the panels. My far right is Nadav Zafrir, who is the co-founder and CEO of Team 8, a cybersecurity firm of which you're going to hear about a lot in future. And he previously worked in the IDF in Unit 8200, which is, broadly speaking, Israel's equivalent of GCHQ. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. We've also got Paul Gillen, head of cybersecurity operations for Barclays. And as Willie Sutton once said when he was asked, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. And the banks are the number one target, I would argue, for cyber criminals, because banks have money and they have a lot of customers. A lot of the customers are not technically very expert and are therefore very good targets for the criminals. And to my immediate right is Sinisha Patkovich, who is the Vice President of Security Advisory for BlackBerry. And I speak as a very loyal BlackBerry user, which was taken not quite from my cold, dead fingers, but from my extremely reluctant fingers when The Economist stopped using them. Now, we want to make this very interactive, so I guess the fact you've come to this session means that you are reasonably up to speed on the technical issues. So I've told the panel not to explain everything absolutely in words of one syllable, but if there's a bit of jargon you don't understand, just stick your hand up, don't be embarrassed. I may interrupt from time to time, just saying, hang on, what a moment, when you say SSL, what do you mean, or something like that. So if there's jargon you don't understand, don't be shy. And we're going to take lots of questions from the audience, and it's always more interesting if the questions are skeptical or hostile. So if you just want to say, I endorse what the panel's just said, and please read my book, that's nice, but it's even better if you say the panel doesn't seem to have taken into account X or Y or Z. I thought we'd start this off just by having a quick brainstorm from the panel about the things that we are most worried about, and perhaps also the things that we are most optimistic about. The world of cybersecurity, a term that I hate. In fact, if anyone says cyber too frequently, it's usually a sign they don't know what they're talking about. But it is a world of computers and networks has been evolving very fast, and things that we were very worried about a few years ago, we may be less worried about now, perhaps because they've been solved, more often because new and more dangerous things have evolved. My own feeling is that our fundamental problem is that the internet was not designed to be the central nervous system of modern life. It was set up as a means of academic cooperation, exchanging information, operating on the basis of trust and goodwill. And if the founders of the internet had been told about all the e-banking and e-commerce and infrastructure and all the other things that would be running over the internet, they would have been horrified. But we are where we are. And so I'm going to turn, first of all, to Nadav and ask you, what's the thing when you look around, the problems that you deal with and that your customers come to you, what's the thing that keeps you awake at night, or the couple of things that keep you awake at night?
I think the biggest problem that we're dealing with is that basically we're living in two different clocks. So the defense and the offense, the attackers and the defenders live in two different time zones. The time to market and the innovation pace that the attackers are working by is just so much faster than we imagine, that even though there is a lot of progress in defense, in cybersecurity defense, in IT defense, in critical assets defense, we're still moving in the on the defense side much slower than the attack side. And so the gap is just broadening and broadening and broadening. And that becomes, that leads to a situation where I see in many of our customers is that the cost of ownership of IT is just becoming unsustainable. And so we see almost a perfect storm where the sophistication of the attackers rises. There's a scarcity of talent. The dependence and the interconnectedness is just rising. And altogether, we get almost a perfect storm where the current solutions, at least from my perspective, are just not effective enough and definitely not cost effective enough.
That's cheerful. Thank you very much for that. Well, we'll get on to the optimistic stuff later. Paul, what keeps you awake at night? Without getting into too specific things, because we don't want to give the bad guys more ideas than they already have.
I suppose from the defender's perspective, and certainly from the bank's perspective, Barclays is quite a large organisation. We're operating out of 50 countries and 140,000 employees, and we're trying to be agile because the market has changed, and I suppose the expectation that of always on connectivity and convenience by customers, and we have to obviously step up and match that. But from a security perspective, it's not always security by design is not always then top of the agenda when it comes to the development in order to get to market quickly. So that's probably one of the things. And then the next is that I suppose you said about the internet and attribution, I suppose, of crime. So people can continue to attack, as Nadav has said, and with very little, or what's apparently very little consequences to their actions, and attributing all of the various different attacks that we and all of the other financial institutions see to criminals, and for them to face some sort of justice doesn't seem to be equitable either. So there are a couple of little things that I would say from my perspective that I worry about.
That's already two very interesting points. The idea of the perfect storm with the increased cost of doing this stuff. Some of the solutions may be out there, but the cost of owning IT in this sort of hyper-connected world is getting bigger and bigger. The speed, the attackers are evolving rather like hostile bacteria or viruses, are evolving faster than we can make our immune system and our spectrum of remedies work. And how does it look from BlackBerry's point of view, Sinisha?
Sure. So few good points already here, and perhaps from the customer perspective, when I look at our customers, large enterprises and governments, what I can see there is complexity of IT, complexity of systems is increasing dramatically, right? There's more and more systems, and they're getting distributed. And this is not helping IT security, right? Complexity is the enemy of security. Security through simplicity is excellent, but it's very hard to achieve. The other thing that I notice with customers that they tell me about, the CIOs and the CISOs, quite often, is that convenience trumps security 10 out of 10 times, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you work for a defense company where you have to do it the right way. But it's always about convenience, and so they have this issue of finding the right trade-off. And they struggle with that trade-off. And so there's a lot of that, and I think that keeps them awake at night, and me as well, because they are my customers. Convenience trumps security, so security has to be convenient. So that's the message there. But in order for security to be convenient, then you need security by design. Security by design in software is very expensive to do, and most companies do not bother doing it because it increases their time to market of the new gadget, new operating system, and so on. And they essentially tell customer, here is a new cool gadget, your customers love it, but do some aftermarket security add-ons and sort of beef it up aftermarket, which is very complex and not that elegant. And the third thing that I would want to mention here that I find somewhat worrying is that CIOs are having a tough time justifying spend on security. And there is that issue of governance between the board and CIOs, where boards typically do not understand security language and have a bit of that dashboard mentality, just tell me it's okay, it's green. And CIOs essentially need to find, I'm going to talk later maybe about solutions for these problems, but this is, I think, a very widespread issue in the enterprise.
Yes, I think you've touched on one of the absolutely crucial things, which is that the decision makers basically don't understand what the problem is about. And we've got a very sharp sort of generational divide, really, between digital natives who may be complacent or careless or have other problems in the way they deal with computers. They do basically understand what it's about. And the people of sort of my age who basically, and older, who basically don't. And I don't know, when you're pitching securities for your pitching to customers for your company, Nadav, how do you explain to them how serious this is? Because what they just see is a large bill at the end for a problem they don't understand.
Well, the first thing that I'll tell leadership is that they have to understand that at the end of the day, it's not somebody in IT in the basement is not going to solve their problem. It's just impossible. If they don't have a business-driven cyber strategy, and if they don't educate themselves and become what we call cyber literate, then there's no way that the people in the IT division are going to be able to solve the problem. There's a sort of a literacy gap between leadership and IT. So IT knows a lot about IT and security, very little about the business, and vice versa. What I tell them is that although they will probably not become natives in cyber or in the digital arena, they can learn it, right? There's a cutoff point where when I joined 8200, it was around 2005, and they told me, listen, you're joining a cyber organization, but it's a bit of a problem because you're an immigrant to cyber. Because the cutoff point is in 1973, and they said anybody that's born before 1973 is never going to be a native to cyber. And that's the bad news. The good news is that you can learn new languages. So what I tell leadership is, listen, finance is also a complex issue. And marketing is not that simple, and so is legal and HR. And you have to do those. And now there's just another aspect of business, which is essential not only for your security, but also for your competitiveness. Because it's become an enabler. It's not just something, it's not like physical security. It's actual business enabler for your organization. So that's the first thing. You just got to do it. And if you won't do it, well, you're in trouble. And I think there's, and this is why I am optimistic on the leadership side. I think this is becoming common knowledge. And common sense of leadership is to educate themselves and to become literate and to go down and to drill into this. And we do see it happening. And so I think it's become so bad that they just can't ignore it anymore.
Of course, one of the problems is we don't yet, the board members and decision makers generally respond to the kind of carrots and sticks from outside. And the criminal liability, the civil liability, the regulators, the insurers, who are all over you if you get something wrong in terms of your physical safety. Mm-hmm. If this ceiling falls down here, everyone's going to get really, really cross. The Connaught rooms will be cross, and the Milken Institute will be cross, and you'll be cross, and we'll all be suing each other. Everybody understands a ceiling falling in. If there's Wi-Fi here, and there's something on the Wi-Fi that is stealing our data or doing something bad to our devices, planting malware, whatever, it's not quite clear who sees who. Will we even know about it? Who's going to get cross with whom? Who picks up the bill at the end? And so it must be quite difficult for you at Barclays because you've got customers who, if you say we've had a problem, the first thing your customers are going to say is not good for you for spotting the problem. They're going to say, we're going to take our business elsewhere. Your shareholders are not going to be pleased if you admit you've got a problem. Your suppliers may not be pleased if you admit you've got a problem. Your employees may not be pleased if you admit you've got a problem. So there's an instinctive bias towards sort of disguising problems and keeping them secret rather than fessing up to them and trying to deal with them.
You have a point. I think that's a societal thing. I think that in reality, we've seen, and from my background, I was the head of operations at the European Cybercrime Centre, and I think that in reality, getting organisations to cooperate at that level. I'll give you an example. If somebody goes into a Barclays branch with a double-barrel shotgun and holds everybody up and steals £100,000 and runs out the door, we will be viewed by society as being a victim of crime, the same as everybody in the branch has been. But if the same criminal managed to hack in and steal the same £100,000, we're not a victim of crime, we're in some way negligent. And as a result, the same would apply. So it's a societal thing, and I think in some way, from a media perspective, there is a little bit of maturing will have to be done by society generally, that we will have to view cyber criminals as exactly what they are. They're criminals. They're committing crime. They're stealing money. They're stealing data. They're causing damage. And they're doing it from afar. And the justice system is not set up to deal with crimes where the perpetrators do not turn up in order to commit the crime. Jurisdictional issues are absolutely phenomenal, the effort, etc. But to go back to your point, yes, the cooperation then is not optimal. So cooperation between financial institutions is actually very good, but society generally, cooperation in the area of cyber is not as good as it could be. If the same thing was going for cooperation where criminals were stealing cash in transit, we'd be all over that. Everybody would be all over that. Society would be all over that. That used
to be a very common crime, sticking out, and now with a mixture of good intelligence and good physical precautions and so on. That doesn't
and of course, they do have to turn up.
They have to turn up, yes. And it's very interesting on this information sharing. If there's anyone here from the United States, there's a bill on this which has been stuck for, I think, 5 years now in Congress, and is inching. It was meant to be done by the month of October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month in the United States, and it's still struggling to find a foothold in the very crowded congressional timetable. But you had a very interesting point, Zanisha, about security by design being expensive. And this is one of the really striking things for me, that if our cars and our planes crashed the way our hardware and software crashes, we'd be really angry. That would just, wouldn't be tolerated. But we somehow got very low expectations when it comes to security. Do you think, is that going to change? Are people going to start saying, I don't want the kind of the Lada software, I want the BMW software, the Mercedes software, the stuff that isn't going to crash, isn't going to go wrong? Do you see any rolling from customer pressure there, or if not from there, where else is pressure going to come from for more reliability?
Right, it has to come from the end customer, right? It's end customer driven, it's choice driven, it's an economic question as well, right? Who's going to be liable if my funds are stolen from my bank account, right? If my credit card is stolen, might be bank, might be insurance company, might be me taking the hit. So I completely agree. And there is the issue of privacy as well, which in Europe is a very, very big topic, not so much in some other parts of the world, which I think we need to focus on. I think also the Milken Institute could also maybe emphasize a little bit more in the future and maybe lead some of the debate on the sort of responsible disclosure of security incidents. I don't think there's enough of that, to be honest, because nobody wants to go public with that. So when companies do get cyber attacks or security attacks, and they do have breaches, they typically do not want to disclose that unless required by law. But we really need this to be shared. We need some kind of a way, even anonymously, to share that because it helps others. In many of these situations, companies are not aware that they do have security incidents. So maybe the only way to find out is if you see that your competitors do better than you, but you may not know that you're leaking data, right? And so that's because of the complexity. That's because of also bad judgment on the part of decision makers. There's a lot of bias involved which people are not aware of in decision making about security, and that bias goes against spending on security. And the most typical example is that unless you know somebody firsthand who has suffered a big loss due to security incident, you are very likely to just ignore the risk, right? So the more of this we see in public, the more we talk about it, the more it's in the news, the more, even if we can somehow privately share in the industry, let's say in the financial industry, if you can have some kind of anonymous sharing system, that would be of huge help to increase the awareness and to help the boards make more sound decisions.
I mean, there is sharing between banks, isn't there?
Yes,
I mean,
very, very comprehensively.
Very
Actually, I would say from an industry perspective, I'd say the financial services industry would be well up there with the best of them in relation to sharing about incidents that occur between ourselves. Yeah.
But the difficulty is, how do you transmit that knowledge to the public?
Right, even to some other industries as well,
yes,
that do not do that, right? I chose banks.
I think that fraud and crime, etc., shouldn't be a competition issue. You know, if you've been vulnerable to an attack today, or if one of your competitors as such in the market have been vulnerable to an attack today, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be vulnerable to the same one tomorrow. So information and intelligence is everything. And if you save somebody today, then they can probably save you tomorrow. I think, to be honest, I think in the financial services sector, we've learned that lesson quite well. And I think that we are coping with, cooperating with each other quite well. That doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. And again, even when we're sharing, it's constant defense. I would like to see us get moving and having a closer relationship with law enforcement and globally to see if we're in a position to maybe attribute some of the crimes and make people answerable for what it is that they've done. It will, in the short term, obviously reduce the crime. It won't make it go away. It doesn't make, crime is never going to go away. But it shouldn't be a competition issue.
Yeah. We're getting onto the human factor, in fact, very quickly on what many of you may have assumed would be a rather technical discussion, because we noticed we've talked almost not at all about the kind of malware, the way it's delivered, the sort of way networks are designed and so on. We've been talking, we almost instantly got onto the question of how do you educate your decision makers to do the right thing. what we need in terms of the legislative and other legal frameworks. But I'm going to switch now. We've looked at the threat quite a bit, and we'll get back to that a bit more later on. But I now want to just look at the other dynamic, which is how our defences and ability, for that matter, to counterattack are evolving. There's lots of really interesting stuff out there, ranging from better threat intelligence to using honeypots and honey nets, where you put stuff on your network that you know attackers are going to go for, and then of course that tells you that they're there. You know, virtualizations, you don't really have computers, you have little bubbles of software which you can monitor much better. All sorts of interesting things happening. None of them perhaps individually offer a solution, but there's certainly the defence arsenal is much better stocked than it used to be. So Nadav, talk us through, what do you see as the upcoming optimistic things on the defensive side?
So I think the optimistic side is that we realize in the industry, and I think mostly, like you said, in the new companies, in the startups, and there are about 500 security startups in the world right now. I think we're starting to understand that the human factor is very, very central to what we're doing. For example, in enterprise cybersecurity, in the post-breach, that means that an attacker has gone through your defenses, your perimeter defenses, and is within your network. We are coming up with a solution that doesn't even try to look for the malware, but tries to understand who is behind the malware. Who are the people behind the malware? What kind of decision-making procedures do they have? What kind of vulnerabilities do they have? Because at the end of the day, I think we're starting to understand that this is not going to be a passive tactical issue. This is a strategic, proactive, ever-changing issue. And at the end of the day, it's a learning competition. It's a learning competition between people that are trying to attack you, and you have to defend yourself as best you can. And at the end of the day, it's people against people. What we're used to, and I think this was probably true until 2005, is a completely asymmetric domain in terms of offense and defense. Why? Because I can keep on attacking you again and again and again. There's not going to be any attribution. Nobody's going to do anything to me. I have to be right on one instance, whereas Barclays has to be right on millions of instances daily
per day, yeah.
In order to come up right. You just have to make the one mistake, and I'm in. So what we're trying to do, and this is why I'm optimistic, and I see other organizations doing this, saying that we have to stop this. It's a learning competition. We're not going to win in this asymmetric warfare, in the battle between defense and offense. We have to think like offense. We have to understand what their vulnerabilities are, and they do have vulnerabilities, even though they're moving very, very fast.
Give some examples. What are the sort of typical vulnerabilities of attackers that we could...
So it depends on the domain, but let's take enterprise domain, right? So in an enterprise domain, I think for sophisticated attackers, going through the perimeter is the easy part. The hard part is what happens once they get in, right? They're in this huge network. It's very complex, like you said. There are hundreds of thousands of endpoints. There are billions of interactions daily. It's very hard to find their way around. And for example, one of the vulnerabilities that they have is that they have to move within a network that defense knows much better than offense, right? And so that is a vulnerability. If you don't move, you're useless, right? Because if I go into a bank, not Barclays, of course, but another one, I go in there for a reason, right? There's an ROI issue for the offense. I go in there because I want something specific. It's a targeted attack, right? These are your sophisticated attackers. So one of the vulnerabilities that they have is limited amount of information about what's going on in the network and the need to move again and again and again, what we call maneuvering or lateral movements within a network. That's a vulnerability. If you look at it from their perspective, you understand that there are different topologies to networks. Topologies meaning the way networks are the architecture of the network. There's the architecture of us as normal users. There's architectures for IT, and there's architecture for attackers. If we can put on our goggles and think like attackers and see their vulnerabilities, every once in a while we can come up with a proactive solution which will put us ahead in the competition between defense and offense, and that's happening. Okay?
So that would mean either not keeping details of the network architecture on that network, or if you have it there, having it full of misleading information that they will...
For example, for example. And again, you talked about the orders. So one of the things that we like to joke about is the secret pact between IT and sophisticated attackers, because both of them like order. Because if I'm a sophisticated attacker, one thing that I do want to see is order and structure and predictability, because then I know where I'm going, where I came from, what's around me. However, if you're an IT administrator within a huge network, you also want order, right? You want everything to be patched at the same day. You want everybody to change their username and password on the same day. If you understand that, you come to a realization that you have to think like the offense thinks and to restructure the way you do the defense within your network, right?
It's really interesting. Paul, creative chaos in Barclays, is that the way to file attackers? Tell us what makes you optimistic.
Well, again, as I said, we're operating in out of 50 countries. So I suppose our challenge there is because we're operating in different markets, the threats are different in different regions, and we have to be constantly looking at the threat landscape. So, and the threat landscape per country or per region, depending on where it is that we're operating from. And the tool set is getting better. We're getting quite a lot of additional investment in staff and resources in order to beef up ourselves. We're looking at threats both from inside and from outside. And I think we're heading in the right direction. I think we've had a complete makeover, and I think we're heading in the right direction. Intelligence being... Yeah.
Can you give us any specifics of things that you think, I couldn't have done that a year ago and now I can do it and it's really easy?
No, I can't think of anything.
While you think of that, I'll turn to Sinisha, because BlackBerry, of course, was the company that first developed encryption in the palm of your hand, with your to the point that other countries immediately got quite cross about it and were demanding that we have that they handed over the encryption keys. But how do you see it from from your point of view? What's making you optimistic?
So I'll tell you a use case or a case study in what makes me really optimistic, and that is that you can make security seamless, and if you make security seamless and consistent across your systems, that means that you are much stronger, because there's a truth in security that you're as secure as your weakest link. Everybody knows that who deals with security. So it's enough that you have one kind of system or one kind of mobile device or one kind of laptop that's not patched or not secure enough, and that's your weakest link. So it doesn't matter how strong your security is elsewhere. So we recently dealt with a large European government that told us that they wanted one phone that can be a government classified, restricted, sensitive phone for data and voice security, but also personal phone that can do WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter on one phone that's completely seamless to use, no different than the phone from the shop. So not a single more interaction with the phone. And that was a very tall order, right? And that government learned through a series of issues that they've faced, and that was that the users always go the path of least resistance, which is if you give them a secure tool, and if it's not seamless, completely effortless, and they happen to have their personal phone, they will text. Doesn't matter whether they work for the government or whether they will simply resort to whatever is easy to do. And so they learn through that is a big risk. However, if you take such a phone, personal phone, and if you put a security tool such as a sandbox or a container, which I guess some of you use, that is not seamless, you actually lower the security. You put a security tool, but you lower the security because people don't use it, and they even text in spite of it, they continue texting or text more, right? So what these guys wanted is one phone that can do both things, and secure voice, right, for secure. And so we deliver that, and that for me was a key learning, was that, and that is a good solution because there is no secondary phone in that government any longer. That risk is removed. There's one password that unlocks the phone, and the user will use the classify, the government, the work perimeter, because there is no extra steps needed. Whether you email personal or work, there's nothing else they need to do. It's just one touch, right? And this is what I think is a great news, is that technology can help make security seamless.
Yes, I was just interviewing Phil Zimmerman, who's produced something called the Black Phone. He was the guy who invented the pretty good privacy cryptography, PGP. But it seemed to me that if I was going, as journalists sometimes do, to unfriendly countries, the last thing I'd want is to carry one of these phones, because people would think, why is this supposedly innocent tourist carrying a $800 phone that offers automatic encryption? But that's another question. Let's take some points from the floor. Don't be shy. You're allowed to ask very complicated or very simple questions, or anything in between. Dan, there's a lady at the back. Could you bring the microphone to her? And I apologise, I'm going to occasionally refer to people as ladies who are actually gentlemen and vice versa. This is not because I'm short-sighted, but I just can't really see anything to these lights. But I think,
no,
go ahead.
The lights are very difficult, I agree. I was born well before 1973, so I'm an immigrant, definitely. But one of the things that always seems to me about the cyber question is I worry as much, if not more, about risks inside the business as I do from outside the business. And that's true whether it's finance or infrastructure companies, which I also deal with. And the way this conversation has gone, I think somebody mentioned inside Barclays a minute ago, but this conversation feels as if it's about people attacking you from outside, whereas I think most of the big risks are for people that are well inside your perimeter. They understand, or they're leavers and you don't remove the passwords, all of those kinds of issues. And I'd like some response to how we deal with that, please.
Great question. Well, let's look at insider threats and how to deal with them.
So I think you have to look at it from a holistic point of view. I do agree that insider threat might be, in some organizations, that sometimes even more dangerous than what you can see from the outside. I think what we are seeing already are hybrid situations where as sophisticated, what they call APT or advanced persistent threat, will have someone from the inside and then a couple of people from the outside, and they'll be working together. So you have to look at it from a holistic point of view. I think that rather than, and here I think I might disagree a little bit about what you said with regards to the weakest link. I think we have to look at it as a network versus network. So the agility of a network is what we have to look at, and the network is the people, it's the hardware, it's the software, it's the procedures, it's the literacy programs, it's the audit. We have to look at it as a sort of an organism that changes all the time and will be under attack all the time. And so at least from a business-driven cyber strategy, what we try to do is say, listen, you cannot protect all the data all the time. And not all data is created equal. Sometimes the same data at a different date has totally different implications if it's out on the street. And so you have to look at the organization as an organism, both the people and the hardware and the network. And then you have to look holistically from a business-driven approach. And obviously expect that at the end of the day, no matter what you do, there will be cybersecurity breaches within your organizations. And so you don't have it's not enough to preemptively get ready for, or preemptive in terms of not getting breached, but also what do you do when it does happen? Because if you're well prepared and you have the procedures and you have the literacy and you have the programs for that, then once it does happen, first of all, you can identify it faster, but also deal with it faster. And dealing with it is, again, it's not just on the technological level, it's on a PR level, it's on a legal level, it's on a customer level. Again, it's a whole macro picture of your organization. And the people within inside the organization, like you said, are very much a part of this for the bad, but also for the good, because they can also become a part of your cybersecurity posture.
It's very difficult, though, because we have not really got used to the idea that humble employees can do devastating damage to the organisation. And you know, if you're worried about endpoint vulnerabilities, or someone who can swap a keyboard, maybe someone who's a minimum wage cleaner, stick a USB stick into a USB port, turn the computer on, turn it off again in the middle of the night, who's going to know?
So I don't believe I really don't believe that in sophisticated organizations that really understand the business, that is the case. It happens in movies, And it's become so popular that I've seen the last episode of Homeland is also a cyber story. But it doesn't really happen that way. You know, you don't find a couple of script kids sitting somewhere taking down the Pentagon from their basement, and you don't find a cleaning lady sticking a USB somewhere and taking a bank down. It just doesn't happen that way. If you look at it holistically and you have the right procedures down. Of course, she might be one link in a very sophisticated attack.
Yes.
However, if you look at the whole thing from a macro organism point of view, and I like your metaphor of how this was structured to begin with, and change the way you look at this, then it just that one minimum wage person sticking a USB usually won't be able to take down the system.
But I mean, there was a case, I'm not sure that it was Barclays or another bank, but there was a KVM, keyboard video mouse attack on a bank in London, which involved tricking the bank into allowing someone claiming to be a maintenance guy to go into a supposedly secure area, just an irregular bank branch, and sticking a particular gadget into the server, which allowed the criminals who were sitting nearby remotely to start, effectively carting money out of the bank, and that was fundamentally a very low-tech, weakest link human vulnerability. Was that Barclays?
It was.
I'm sorry. I don't want to intrude on private.
That was before Paul took over.
Obviously,
it was
yes.
before you took over, and it could have happened to anyone.
Or you could have a cleaner who sticks the USB key to charge her phone in the middle of the night.
That's right.
We've had that
but
too.
how do you do with a bank with, I think, do you say 55 countries?
50, yes.
50 countries, hundreds of thousands of staff, ranging from high to low, and any one of them could be someone who could be part of an attack. How do you deal with that? How do you?
You have to have an insider threat program.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. You have to have it. You have to factor it in. You have to factor it into your strategy. You have to. I mean, what you say is absolutely correct. But the number one thing, if you keep it in your mind, and you have to keep the big picture in mind, is how do you highlight irregularities that require your attention? That is the big question. Whether they are from the inside or whether they are from the outside, and then having enumerated what they are, you have to then set about a program in place to look at, maybe again what Nadav said, your most valuable environments. Can you protect all of the data and all of the systems and all of the money all of the time? No, you can't, because as a bank, I'm not sure the statistic, but I think we've something like 50 million customers, and with 50 million customers. You have to let 50, so you're talking about closing the network off and keeping, no, we have to let 50 million people into the network every day because we want them there.
Yeah.
And the same with every other institution that has customers in place. And therefore, why would you bother trying to attack the network, via the hard way, when you can just infect somebody's machine locally and withdraw funds from sufficient amount of people to make a very good living from it.
Yeah.
So, but it's highlighting the irregularities, enumerating what it is, getting the intelligence system in place to make sure that you understand the changing landscape. If you understand the changing landscape and you're ahead of the curve on that, then you're in a position then to prioritize where you're going to put your most defenses around your most invaluable environments. And then you've also got your high-risk user groups. So you have to identify who are the high-risk user groups in the organization, and are they high risk to be attacked, or are they high risk that they could do something illegitimate or be compromised in some way, shape or form?
You came up with a really good phrase there, which is highlighting the irregularities that require our attention.
Yes.
And that comes in two halves. There's lots of software out there that will highlight irregularities, but the getting down the number of false positives is the big challenge, because most cybersecurity, hate the phrase, dashboards, just show constant blinking red because someone somewhere in the organisation has just unplugged a printer, someone else has just put a thumb drive into their computer, someone else is visiting some site they ought not to. It's very easy to generate alerts. It's much, much harder to work out the second part of what you said, the irregularities that require your attention.
And that's what Nadav
So that's
said about
what we call the SNR, or the signal to noise ratio, which is just unsustainable. I don't know how it is in Barclays. We've seen organizations that have over 100,000, and some of them at the millions of alerts a day. And like you said, what do you do with that? And so again, what our philosophy, or my philosophy, is that you just have to start thinking like from a different perspective. Rather than passively trying to look at the at the behavioral models and the anomalies. You have to lure attackers into making mistakes so that they can stick out, so the fidelity rises. And again, these are different perspectives in how you treat attackers now.
Yeah. Give us the perspective from BlackBerry. You must get a lot of attacks.
Every company does, right? Particularly when you deal with governments and so on. But I think that's a good question about what you do with the insider. Well, I think we recently acquired a company from Israel called Watchdogs just because of the huge issue with document sharing. And that's a typical problem most companies have, which is employees want to work from home and want to, sometimes for a good reason take the document out, which ends up being a breach. So the need to know paradigm is not enforced in most enterprises. The access rights are not diligently enforced. I would actually like to see more companies hire a contractor to be pretend an employee, to spend some time in the company, work in a department, see what the person can access as they move from department to department. That would tell you essentially what is open for grabbing in your network, right? And so there is a need for that diligence inside, which is costly, right? Because as we heard again and again, the systems are complex. There's so many of them. Some are internal, some are external. So I think there's also need for better federated access management, better federated identity management. So there's going to be, I think, more investment in that. But overall, if you do not account for what's happening with your files, so your software and your access systems have to account for every access, and you need to understand whether employees should have rights to access this or not. And there is a fine line there because businesses typically do not like to be limited. Everybody will scream and say, well, I need access to that. I need access to this. And so there is a fine line there, but you have to walk that fine line if you want to make sure you enable business and you lower the risk, which is the optimal point where every business should be, right? Lower the risk to an optimal level while enable the business to be able to perform. And this is the balance you need to strike. Technology can help. There is a lot of manual sort of people work that needs to happen as well, operational process work.
Let's take some more questions. There's two there. We'll take both of those together. First of all, the gentleman in row 2, and then the gentleman immediately behind him.
We heard at the beginning of the program that the attacking was going a lot faster than the defensing. And so it kind of raises, first of all, a concern, but the question cutting through everything that was said today is, are we getting to a point where this gap continues to get wider and there's a sort of collapse where we can't face the attacks anymore because there's not enough defensive posture? Is it something that concerns you, or how do we deal with that?
That's a great question. What will the world look like if we lose, and how will we know we've got there? And the gentleman behind in the pink tie?
Afternoon. True or false, via the dark net, you can listen to any mobile phone call in the UK. True or false?
Is it true or false that via the dark net, which is an interesting phrase in itself, you can listen to any mobile phone call in the UK? Well, I'm sure there are people who, without using the darknet, can listen to any mobile phone call in the UK, and I'm very glad that they can with proper legal authorization. But that's my feeling about this is that The Bourne Identity is a great film, but it is a Hollywood drama. It's not a documentary, and some of the most zealous digital privacy defenders seem to think that The Bourne Identity is fact and that they are actually Jason Bourne. But Nadav, what's your view on that? First of all, is it possible for someone without the resources of government to listen to other people's mobile phone calls? And secondly, what will the world look like when we lose, or if we lose, and how we know we've got there?
So with regards to the true or false question, I think the answer is theoretically, you don't have to be in the darknet. We can technologically prove that any phone which is not encrypted can be tapped into. Can that be done by non-government, non-lawful interception organizations to all the phones? I think false. But the question is, is this a theoretical or a practical? From a practical point of view, I think the answer is no. On the widening gap, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think we're in a transition point right now. I think many of the technologies that we see right now are still, on the defense side, are still passive and are still trying to fix the problem that you were talking about in the beginning. The fact that these networks were not designed in order to deal with all the maladies that are happening in the network. You know, and I think it's going to get worse because it's just much easier to get hold of state-sponsored or enterprise-level technologies. By the way, if you look at the darknet, you can find cyber as a service. If you look at what happened in Target in 2014, or the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, and you look at the actual malware or the exploits, which are what the attackers use in order to leverage mistakes or glitches in the code that was designed, those were bought for about $10,000 on the darknet. All right, so they were able to get the credentials of about 100 million target users.
Sorry, Nadav, just hang a moment. For people who don't know about this, this was a very big American supermarket called Target, which was perhaps one of the most spectacular, successful attacks by criminals,
Right.
as you said, a year and a half ago.
And the technology that they used was bought for about $10,000. Now, if I take Paul's metaphor about going into a Barclays bank downstairs and rushing in and taking $100,000, you know, I could probably use, let's say, some kind of rifle that some state designed, let's say an M16, right? So somebody designed an M16 for the military. I could buy an M16 on the dark net or in the dark market, not on the dark net. I don't know how much it's going to cost, probably 5,000 pounds. I can get one. I buy two 10,000 pounds. I go in and I rob a bank and I get 100,000 pounds. And taking great risk. However, I cannot take an F-16 and rob the bank, right? Yeah. F-16 fighter plane, you know, that's, you can't buy that, right? And even if you could buy it, you'd need airports and pilots and infrastructure. You can't park it near the bank. It doesn't really work. However, in cyber, I can get a hold of the F-16 and rob a bank. And it does happen.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't think it's going to collapse because I think the level of maturity of cyber defense is rising steadily and quite fast. Like I said, there's about 500 startups in the world right now trying to come up with novel solutions that will make a leap forward in terms of how we protect ourselves. Unfortunately, I do think that the gap is opening, and before we start closing it, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I'll come to Paul and Tanisha in a moment, but I think we're not actually going to lose completely because the technology and stuff that we need is actually there. You know, 5-10 years ago there wasn't, but if you've got the money, the discipline, the energy, the board level commitment to make these things work, yeah, you will still be breached, but you can put yourself in a position where breaches won't be catastrophic. It's I think all the ingredients we need are now there. Are they ubiquitous? No. Are they easy? No, but they are there. But Paul, what's your feeling? What's your feeling about that and the widening
I think there will be so many flags towards that Armageddon. I think that society will be thinking about it, and society will change. You even said a second ago when you were describing the Target breach, you didn't describe it as a you know, a theft of data. You said it was one of the most successful attacks ever.
Yes.
So we have to change so therefore the people who did it were successful, and they were celebrities. They were in some way more clever than the people who they breached, who, as Nadav had said, had maybe withstood hundreds or thousands of attacks in the past, or may not have. I don't know. So with the result is that when we change our attitude and see these people for what they are, which are criminals, they're stealing our data, they're stealing our funds, they're driving up the cost of doing business, they're making society more insecure, society is not in a position to make them attributable for their crimes, etc. When that gets to that stage where that matters, then things will change and society itself will change. And therefore, I don't believe it will get to the stage, where we have lost and it's all over and we're all standing with our arms apart wondering where did it all go wrong. I think it will have, we will have so many flags that society may have to change. We may have to have, and I used to be the director of the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force at EU level, which was 14 police agencies working together to fight cybercrime between between the USA, Australia, and the European Union. And as a result is that they had so much more effect because they were all sitting in the one room. So the 14 police agencies were sitting in the one room and they were discussing cases openly every day with each other from multiple jurisdictions, acting like one single team. And that team had really very, very good successes in a very short period of time. Is Britain or the United States or Australia or any other European country prepared to have police officers operate in their country from another police service? I don't think we're at that place yet. Will we end up in that place at some stage in the future? I think we will.
So we need a kind of digital hot pursuit.
Well, what other way are we going to do?
Yeah, I agree. Sisha, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So technology can do a lot to help with that, so for us to get ahead. I think we've spent a lot of money over the last year in acquisitions, most of them related to security. You've heard that there is 500 startups in security. I think that's great news. There's a lot of investment in security. In a way, I think security is the new cool, right? It's becoming very interesting, even to a consumer, right? To just anybody out there. And I think this is what our mission has been. And I think this year and next year, what our mission is to bring that high level of security that's very convenient to everybody, from the government to public sector to enterprises to small to medium businesses, and to every single one of you as a consumer on your consumer phone, that you have a very convenient, simple way to understand how secure are you, whether your privacy has been breached. This is what our mission as a company. So I am optimistic, and I think, our customers should be able to sleep at night and focus on their businesses rather than focus on security plumbing, right? That is the whole idea of the technology, right?
Yes. Of course, the trouble is we share our data with so many other people that I'm not sure your phone can tell you whether the data that you entrusted to somebody else 6 months ago has been properly stored or looked after. But we shall get onto that in a moment. Our final two questions there, the gentleman at the back, first one in the white shirt, and then the gentleman just in front of him in the grey shirt, and then we come to the panel, and then we'll wind up.
Thank you. It's John Derrick from Barclays. I'm not about to ask you a difficult question about the bank, but I guess my question follows on your point about data, because my concern is that while Facebook, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, and lots of others can afford the infrastructure investment, what about the smaller enterprises starting who take your data, and in extremis, linked to the Milken Institute, all those charities who take your data? Let's just take, for example, the National Trust. I think they have 4 million members in the UK. That's a lot of data. Do they either have the people or the ability? I'm not talking about that specific institution, but it worries me about entrepreneurship that it's actually slowed down by the cost needed to invest in these systems to protect the data.
Super. If you just pass the microphone in front of you. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Who are the different baddies and what's their different motivations?
Right. Two excellent questions. We've got 6.5 minutes left, so we'll go briskly through those. How do we deal, Nadav, with people who can't afford to hire people like you, but still have lots of data? And secondly, just talk us through the threat universe. We've got pranksters, hacktivists, spies, hooligans, outright criminals, hostile foreign governments. What's the right taxonomy for looking at them?
So on the second one, like you said, there's you have the state level. We've seen stuff happening as back as we can take it back about almost a decade, 2006, when the Russians, at least allegedly, used hybrid warfare techniques against Estonia, which is very much dependent on their internet because they're very advanced. And they bring down their ability to manage the country through the internet. So those are state-level attacks. And advanced countries in the world are looking at this as the next domain of warfare, right? And so the Americans talk about it as the fifth domain. In Israel, we call it the fourth domain. But we understand that this is a new domain where warfare will take place. It's different than the physical domains. It doesn't, the physics are different. It's a man-made domain, but still, we're going to see warfare in cyber, and those are the state-sponsored, either for destruction or for intelligence, and it's just a new way of doing old things. Then you have the cyber criminals. I think cyber criminals, at least right now, and especially because of what Paul was saying, the attribution side, have it really, really well. Because unfortunately, most of the attacks that we see don't come from Australia to Europe. They come from other countries to Europe, and there isn't that sense of collaboration between the areas where we see the central, let's call cyber criminals or cyber mafia, which is not, let's say, because I don't want to accuse anybody in the English-speaking part of the world, mostly. And so those are the organized cyber crimes. And then we haven't seen it yet, but I think they're very savvy, and we will see it. We'll see cyber terrorism. I think terrorists, as we speak, are using cyber to an unimaginable capability in terms of recruiting, propaganda. They have access to the most modern, sophisticated, articulate networks of the world, where 20, 30, 40 years ago, nobody in the world had, and they have it for free. And so those are the players that we see in the world. And in terms of what do you do with, if you're not a Barclays or a huge company, I think what when you go down, you'll see much more managed services. So you'll see a consolidation of companies working together and giving services or cyber as a service or MSSPs, managed services, to companies that can't afford to have the talent and the capabilities that a company like Barclays has.
And of course, Paul, it's sometimes difficult to tell whether someone who's intruding on your network and attacking you is a criminal or maybe a hacktivist, maybe someone doing it for political reasons, or maybe even a foreign government who wants to know about some transactions that you're handling.
Yes, I would think, obviously, predominantly being a financial institution, as the quote earlier on, why do you rob banks? Is because that's where the money is. That's pretty much that would be the vast majority of what we would see is, somewhere people trying to breach the system in order to extract funds from people's accounts in order to extricate it away and money launder it, etc. What are the actors like? I think the crime as a service is something that we see in Barclays from an intelligence perspective, is that it's not any one particular mafia-style person, but there are lots of people who want to commit crimes against financial institutions globally, and they are hiring various different, from malware writers, malware coders, to droppers, to money mules, etc. Everyone's offering those crime as a service to somebody who wants to do that. So I think the crime infrastructure is quite complicated, and taking any one portion of it down, trying to look at the pyramid and saying where do you want to hit that from a policing or a financial institute's perspective, in order to disrupt it, can be quite difficult to decide whereabouts you're going to do. But malware writers, for example, who are selling malware, and then that malware ultimately is used on a customer's machine, and the customer then loses money from their account. The reality of the situation is that the malware writer probably has no idea that his malware was used on that particular customer to do that. It was made in order to do the withdrawal or to get the credentials, etc. But the reality is he or she doesn't know that particular event occurred. If that malware writer was brought to justice, and then, for example, that all of the losses that were attributed globally were brought against them for whatever their malware, from whatever the malware, the code that they did, and they got some pretty serious prison time, I'm not sure that they would, they certainly would think twice about doing it again.
Yes, but I guess they're in the position of someone who manufactures hammers, and they don't know that the hammer's going to be used to hit someone on the head.
Yeah, well, hammer's used as an industrial tool. Malware is used to steal money. It has to be perfect. If it's not perfect and it doesn't work, then we're going to see it. And if we see it, then we're in a position to defend against it. If we're in a position to defend against it, they don't get the money. Yeah. So the coder has to consistently make sure that their malware is bang on the button, that it works 90% of the time. Yeah. So therefore, it's not a hammer.
Very final word from you, Sinisha.
Well, we heard that we cannot prevent all the attacks, right? No matter how much we try, but we can minimize them. And so you need to have layered security. Your products need to have layered security. If they're not layered, there's only one door an attacker needs to open. And so we've seen in the past that has helped our customers protect their data. Even if there is a vulnerability and an exploit and malware, they can only get through one door, but there's 10 more doors in the operating system for them to go through. And this is what the advantage has been.
It's a wonderful metaphor. You get through the first door and there's just yet more doors to follow the attacker. Please join me in thanking our panelists. We finished bang on time. Great questions. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.